Hello and a very warm welcome. My name is David Roth from WPP and it's my pleasure to be your host in today's special live web seminar coming from the World Retail Congress here in Amsterdam. This is the place where global retail leaders come to meet each year in order to discuss the key issues that surround retailing today, and wow, are there some issues to discuss. Day 2 promises to be as interesting, maybe even more than day 1. Well, I'm now joined by Sinead Burke, who is a writer, advocate and academic, and Elaine Bowers-Coventry, who's the incoming Chief Customer and Commercial Officer for Coca-Cola. A very warm welcome. Thank you very much indeed. You've just come off the stage early morning here at the World Retail Congress, Day 2 in Amsterdam. A tremendously interesting, thought-provoking session on diversity. Thanks for coming back here, backstage, to our studio. As an ex-retailer myself, and who sat on the main board of directors of a big international retailer with no women on the board at all, I know that retailing has had a diversity problem for a number of years. Having now recognised that problem, I think the industry has, and by the size of the audience listening to your conversation, I think that's testament to that as well, have recognised the problem. What's the solution?
I think the solution is taking action. Really taking that first step and making something happen. If you look at retailing in general, it should be the most inclusive tent of all, because everyone needs food, shoes, clothes, whatever it is. So there should be business opportunity in there, and I think the more that the retail industry sees the commercial opportunity in inclusion, I think the better off their business will be.
And I think within the chain within an organization and also within the ecosystem in which it exists, realizing that solutions need to be augmented and created at every different section within that. So ensuring that not only the current leadership make amendments that will improve equality or access for the moment in which they have power, but ensuring that it's sustainable. So whether that is developing quotas or various different mechanisms within the organization to ensure diversity by reaching out to local community organizations that have reflections of race or disability, and ensuring those individuals see your company as somewhere in which they could exist, but also making sure that you are developing partnerships with academic institutions to ensure that you are an aspirational business that the next generation want to be part of, because we're seeing more and more that whether it is Generation Z or Millennials, that they want to be existing in a company that not only provides them with currency and a salary, but that fits within their moral compass too. So ensuring that you are a business of aspiration and that you're providing for the diversity of customers that increase your profit margins. One
of the, I suppose, the doyens of business who used to run GE, Jack Welch, always used to say that if you can't measure it, you can't perform against it. Do you think measurement is the baseline? That actually everything starts with understanding a measure and then setting a target, or are targets not a particularly good way of going ahead?
Well, I think for us at Coke, we did it. We took on the challenge of advancing women into the senior ranks in a very business sort of way. So there was an external view of what's the commercial opportunity. Then there was a business case for change. Then there was a clear direction from our most senior leader, our CEO, who then put in place what he expected over a multiple year horizon. So the business could shift into putting together strategies that should yield that vision and make that a reality, and then he measured it. We did the same thing with market share objectives, revenue objectives, etc. So I do think measurements are part of it. However, I think measurements in isolation of the commercial opportunity take it and put it into a smaller box of HR instead of the bigger box of how are we going to grow our business. And if you think about retailers, one of the core measures of retailers is around shopper loyalty. You know, are they meeting people's needs? Are they driving traffic into the store? So I think that the measurement on this should be very aligned to what some of the business imperatives are for retailers.
So you see it in the context of a business strategy as opposed to a diversity strategy.
Yes.
I think both of you made the point about this is a process of time, and not the expectation of it to be sorted really quickly. Do you find that a little bit frustrating, or is that just the acceptance of reality?
It's incredibly frustrating. I think as being somebody who, you know, you spoke about so articulately about the expansion of where Coca-Cola has come from in terms of its representation of women in leadership. And we all want to see this change happen instinctively. But if we create processes where overnight we increase the diversity of people of colour within an organisation of 50% when it was perhaps smaller than that, or the same with disabled people, the culture of that organisation is not ready nor equipped for that change. So in order for it to be authentic, exactly as you said, these things take marginal increments, and it is unfortunate, and I want it to be much more amplified and accelerated in that rate of change. But we need to start, if you haven't already, immediately, and making sure that the company holistically is ready for that ascension.
So
it's a big difference. I think it's a great point you made, because there's slow, that's passive resistance, and there's slow, that's steady progress,
yes,
and that you're taking the organization with you. And I think really making sure that you're on the steady progress of taking people with you is exactly.
And whose job in the organisation should that be?
Yeah.
Everybody's.
Yeah.
It's absolutely everybody's.
Because if it's just an HR function, it pigeonholes it into a program, as opposed to something that is ingrained in the DNA of the way in which the business operates.
I think there should be an expectation from employees. You know, we are living in a climate where we are expecting more hours. We're expecting dedication, we're expecting loyalty, we are creating campuses where individuals can give all of themselves to the working environment and bring their full selves to work. And if we have that expectation on individuals and asking them to bring their holistic selves, then we should be providing spaces where that is accepted, welcomed, invited, but also appreciated. And, you know, that whole self is an educational tool for amending the business model. But it is up to the individual who perhaps is just out of university and starting salary to ask those questions, to provoke senior leadership into thinking in this way. But there is also a responsibility from those within the C-suite to listen to those who have less power and are beneath them based on kind of the design of companies and say, well, this is our responsibility.
I mean, I think you make a really interesting point. I was discussing an interview that my eldest son went to very recently, and I was quite shocked at the questions that he said he asked the employer. And, you know, wasn't that many years ago in my day where you were very grateful to get a job and you just asked the basics about the salary and, you know, when you need to be, where, etc., as opposed to really challenging the employer about you know, how they operate, what they do, what their policies are, what their contribution to the world is, other than just making products.
It's that power of choice.
Yes.
And that, as you said, perhaps there is a greater economy for employment now, but there's also an expectation that individuals themselves see a value within their own capacity, and that if I'm going to enlist with an organisation, I want to make sure that that value is not only respected, but is aligned with whatever values I hold myself.
Now, clearly there's the context of the company, but also there's the context of the company's communication. Coca-Cola is obviously a mass communicator on many, many different levels right across the world. Do you think companies like Coke have also a responsibility within their communications to show a diverse approach?
Absolutely, and I think that's an area where I'm really proud of what we've done, you know, and not just in the past few years, but forever. And if you ever have an interest in looking into this, there's some really interesting stories that are on our webpage. But years ago, in the American South, when it was not really permissible to show people of color and Caucasian people sitting together, things like that, that was quite risky in the 60s. There's a famous billboard print ad where there is an African-American person and a Caucasian person that are sitting on a bench together, and they're physically touching. And the bench also has a little separation of the arm in there. So even some of the nuances in the artwork showed our point of view because we have always been an inclusive brand. You know, the famous Andy Warhol statement
absolutely.
around Elizabeth Taylor, the Queen, and the bum on the street. They all get the same Coke. So I think that we've certainly had that part of our DNA really before we talked about it. In fact, there was a moment of time where we were trying to figure out how to talk about it with the right tone of humility. But I do think brands can really play a role in those conversations. And to Sinead's point, I think people who are considering employment are looking for that sort of conscience with companies.
So finally, what advice, or help, probably that's a better word for it, what help do you think companies should do on the glide path to increasing their diversity within the organisation? What advice would you give them?
I think it has to start with both education and research. So exactly as you were saying, having an understanding of where the company currently exists is the only way in which you can design a path forward to see where it is you need or want to be. If you're suggesting increasing diversity and representation within your company without that, it's not going to be sustainable, nor is it going to be possible. So by delivering that audit first, and then I think it's also about taking a step back and realizing that, exactly as you said, overnight it may not be possible to have that change, but by building advisory councils that are both independent too, but can offer advice to the company and the organization as it does bring that strategic plan into implementation is absolutely essential, so that you have those people who can help you guide through it and give you information that perhaps you don't want to hear, but is absolutely necessary that you do so.
And that was a real game changer for us. When we started on the gender diversity topic 12 years ago, 11 years ago, our chairman and CEO appointed 12 women from across the business, across the world, and said, go into a room for 2 days and figure out what's the strategy.
And empowered them?
Yes, and in fact, because my manager was one of the ones that went in the room, and you know, we were waiting when she came back, like, what happened? And she came back, she said, we're going back in for another day, because what they gave him, he said, it's not ambitious enough, and he told them to go back. So I think two things happened. One is they came back with a more ambitious plan, but they also came back convinced that he was really behind it. So just, and you know, just that step, as well as him really wanting to hear, because he didn't know, right? He wasn't a woman. He was the, you know, chairman and CEO. He had a lot more resources around him to manage his career demands and things like that. So he really, I think, had a very open ear to understand what their experience was and what needed to change to make the numbers change.
So the top's really important, as well as it happening across the organisation. Elaine, Sinead, thank you very much for joining us. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I'm now joined by Jean-Denis Mariali, who is the Chief Digital Officer at LVMH Group. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you.
Your group is huge, vast, in lots of different regions around the world, and lots of different categories. What's the challenge for you at the moment in terms of the things that are possible in terms of the digital world versus the realities of digital within a retailing organisation?
So I think that, so I've joined Guerlain, so I'm working for one of the house of the group, LVMH Group. My role is to accelerate this digital transformation. I think that the main stakes we have currently is probably to make people understand that digital bring a lot of opportunities and the value to better interact with consumers. So it's much more about a change management, I would say, culture, which is important for us to accelerate, rather than just technical project or digital project. So it's to spend the right time with all the people to be sure that the transformation will embark all the employees. So that's the main stake.
The houses that you have under your stable, I suppose, are synonymous with fantastic creative directors.
Yeah.
How do those creative directors view digital as a threat or an opportunity?
At the very beginning, to be fully honest with you, it was I had some hard time to work with a team, because you are at the frontier between the high demanding, very around perfection of everything. And when it comes to digital, it's much more about test and learn, you know. It's make the project live, and then you will have all the time and the ability to improve it. So it's I would say it's confrontation of two very different culture, and I would say that it's also a confrontation between the culture of the print, the beautiful print, the TV spot, etc. to social networks with the necessity to produce ongoing content every day on all the touch points, you know. So there is a requirement of volume. So the stake is to associate the volume of the content, which all the countries, all the brands are asking for, with the quality. So, you know, that's the main challenge we are facing.
And what is the tension there? I mean, is it impossible to do volume at quality?
I think that you had to organize yourself to be able to do so. So we are building an internal factory, internal studio to accelerate and to be much more independent. But obviously, we're working also with external partners. But then again, it's a question of you know, digital upskilling. It's about making people understand why it is so important. It's making all these artistic directors understand that once, if you wait and you make this picture content so beautiful, so perfect, it's going to take some long time, and at the end, none of our countries will use it, okay? Because countries are then working with retailers who need this content 4 or 5 months before everybody. So we had to respect this timing challenge, and so we had a regular meeting, daily meeting to validate together the content we're going to produce, because at the end it's a question of brand equity and brand consistency.
Now, are there any things that digital allows you to do that are actually impossible to do beforehand? Has that actually liberated the organisation, the creativity of the organisation, to think about doing things in a very different way?
I think that the good thing, I will say, it's about consumer centricity. The fact that nowadays the consumer owns the power, the consumer is choosing the prescriptors. So, you know, if I mean, 10 years ago, we were listening to the company's speech, but now we prefer to listen to an influencer, to another customer ambassador, etc. So they are choosing the one they would like to listen to and to follow. So I think that in that context, it brings a lot of power to the consumer, and the company had to organize itself in a much more client-centric, you know, culture, to be sure not to miss this interaction with consumer.
And again, is there tension in that? You know, your fashion houses are very known for choosing who their endorser, celebrity, the face of the brand, the face of this season's collection is going to be, and yet we now have really important key influencers who almost emerge from nowhere, who can have a great influence on the brand being successful or not, and you can't choose them. They emerge. So you have to work with them.
Yeah, so we developed a department within Gala Digital team, which is in charge of monitoring, tracking all these new influencers, and then interact with them, because we know that it is as important to work with the big celebrities, the big influencer, and rather than also all these small and micro influencers. So we are working with all the category influencer, and now we are also working on building this best customer ambassador community, because at the end the best prescriptor you could have is your customer. It's not the influencer, it's the customer. So it's to be able to track them and to build this community and to animate this community.
What have you learned in terms of best practices from this sort of new emergence of influencers around the world?
I think that being authentic is the strong one. To be sure that, because at the end it's a consumer are looking for transparency and authenticity. So if you try to manipulate, you know, to use new prescriptors to push product, it's much more about storytelling. It's much more about consumer experience. It's much more about emotion. Consumers are looking for emotion right now. So it's your ability to create emotion, integrating this new customer experience that develop engagement with your consumer.
And in the context of all of that, how important is coming back to the core principles of the integrity and the story of each of the individual brands themselves?
I would say that when you're working on an engagement and advocacy strategy, the best thing is very simple. It's probably to take a white paper and a pen and to write what you consider as a parity zone with all your competitors and your differentiation zone, and then just focus on your differentiation zone. Saying that for your consumer, it has to be obvious that the differences are this asset. For Guerlain, it's a question of sustainability, it's a patrimony, you know. So we have a lot of things to say. So it's much more about, you know, communicate on your differentiators.
Now, I think it's fair to say the luxury brands have been the slowest of the retailers to embrace transactional e-commerce.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that you see that pace will increase over time, or will there always be a reluctance to sell directly to the customer via an e-channel?
I think that the winning strategy, and all the industry of luxury, I completely understand that, is to develop this direct omni-channel strategy. So moving direct with the e-commerce and with your own retail.
And in that world, what do you think the role of the physical store is still going to be?
It's huge. It's really huge. So once you understand the importance of having a direct retail and this omni-channel, then it gives you the ability to collect data, and we know that data is the new oil for companies. So it gives you the ability to collect, to provide very relevant interaction, and to be able to provide this very innovative, differentiate consumer experience. So if it is your own shop, then you have the ability to choose the experience you would like to deliver. So it's a good way to test things. So we are using our direct shop, our boutiques, to test a lot of innovation when it comes to consumer experience before thinking about rolling out. So it's a good way to test and learn and to capitalize off all your omni-channel strategy in a data collection approach.
Your title is a Chief Digital Officer. There are lots of Chief Digital Officers around the world for different organisations. Would you view success in, 5 years' time, 6 years' time, when the role of a Chief Digital Officer won't be needed because everything will be digital?
Yeah. So I think it's always a short-term job. So if you do
I'm
well
not
your job,
your time away,
no, but I will say that a good CDO is probably in the company for 3 or 4 years, and then if he or she had accelerated digital transformation, then it's up to everybody to become a CDO at each role within the organization, in marketing, in HR, in sales, in operation. So it's much more about education, about change management, about make people think out of the box, use these new ways of working, which are the test and learn, the agility, the co-design, the co-creation with the consumer when you develop something to be sure that you will meet customer expectations. So it's much more about ways of working, mindset, to accept that, it's not because the consumer is buying online that sales director say, okay, you took my customer. No, customer is buying online, offline, in omni-channel world. So it's much more about education. And then 3 or 4 years after, all people are supposed to be the CDO at their level.
So finally, how would you summarize in a word, or maybe I'll give you 2 words, the times that we're living in today from a retail perspective?
To be honest with you, I'm afraid of that, probably because I have two children. And I look at the way they interact with our world, the time they spend on their mobile phone to manage everything, to manage their friends, to manage all your leisure, etc. So their leisure. So it's quite. You could be afraid of that. Then I think that the good thing is that it brings us the requirement of being much more consumer-centric. So at the end, I think it's a winning strategy because, you know, we spend so many times to be product-oriented, brand-oriented, and now nowadays we had to be consumer-centric because consumer had the power. So if you like to survive in the world where you had to disrupt or to being disrupted, then you had to integrate that in your culture, in your strategy, and to be sure that you are aligned with your consumer expectation and you create value for the consumer. And also for when we've seen all these touch point, the multiplication of touch point create a lot of opportunities for companies to collect data. And the consumer accept that. They accept that once you're able to use this data to be much more relevant in their interaction with them. So I think it's a winning strategy for the consumer and for us.
Well, that's a nice summary. Slightly more than 2 words, but we'll let you have it. Jean-Denis, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Thank you to you.
Pleasure. Well, we had such a packed programme yesterday that we never had enough time to show you the interview that we did with Professor Marc Cohen. So here it is now. Well, I'm now joined by Professor Marc Cohen from Columbia University. Marc, thank you very much indeed for joining us. You've just come off the main stage, having given your keynote address at the first day of the World Retail Congress here in Amsterdam. A very warm welcome.
Thank you.
Marc, you're, I think, if you don't mind me saying it, a very rare breed. You know, you're a hard retailer, and now you're an academic, or maybe you're both at the same time, which is, I think, a really interesting perspective as retailing becomes far more complex and probably far more sort of thoughtful and analytical. Let's just take a step back. When you were running major retail groups in the States, what was your view of academics who lectured about retailing?
Well, I often heard or read of various theories, only some of which had some relationship to the reality that I was facing. I'm surrounded by very smart people at Columbia, most of whom have never made a payroll in their lives. So I say that and they groan, and I listen to some of the theories they have and I groan.
Well, it's a very sobering thought, isn't it, when you look at the sales and look at the payroll for the following week and you think,
Well, the consumer space is volatile, the consumer space is erratic, the consumer space is easily disrupted, and so you have to apply theory with a grain of salt. You have to be able to validate some of these intellectual precepts with on-the-ground facts.
Again, looking back at your days at the helm of some of the biggest retail names that the world has, would you have predicted a retail environment such as the one we have today?
Well, I think I did back in the day with others predict the shift back to direct-to-consumer. You know, in the 50s and 60s, it was the catalog that customers did business with, where they didn't physically go to a store because they didn't live near a store. As the Great American Shopping Mall in the United States became ubiquitous, customers responded to the availability of convenient places to shop. They did it with alacrity. The catalog business more or less disappeared. The customer became handcuffed to a physical space. They had to physically go somewhere to browse, to consider, and to transact. Many retailers took advantage of that captive audience that they had. And then along comes the internet. And I would say about 20 years ago, I sat in a room with some very senior, exalted retail gods, some of whom said, this internet thing is a gimmick. Customers will never grant a retailer the use of their credit card. People like me raised my hand and said, wait a minute, every time you go to a restaurant, you grant someone the use of your credit card. And so with others at the time, we felt there was going to be a migration path, and it certainly has occurred faster than anyone would have imagined on both a global and local basis. Now the foot race is delivery and service. Amazon has just upped the ante in the United States by going from 2-day shipping to 1-day shipping, which is a nightmare for virtually all those folks who are chasing them. The customer expects it, you know, the customer expects tremendous access and transparency.
Who's winning and losing in that situation? I mean, it feels like actually the customer is winning every time in this new transactional relationship?
Well, the customer is the big winner, and for the foreseeable future, I think that's going to continue to be the case. The retail winners are the folks who are able to build market share on a sustainable basis and along the way figure out how to make some money doing so.
Well, let's talk about the figure out on how to make some money, because there is an amazing strain on the traditional retail P&L. I mean, can it survive in its current state, that P&L, or does there need to be some real fundamental shift in those ratios? Because the ratio of sales to staff costs, and I mean, they've been pretty much the same since God was a boy.
Well, I think that a traditional legacy retailer can continue to be successful if they create an omni-channel portal, which is to say they make their goods and services available both online and physically. And they run an extremely effective, efficient, and high-tone operation. They can't spend money that's not productive. On the other hand, they have to present themselves in a really top-drawer way.
And how difficult is it now to isolate what's productive and what isn't productive?
It's very difficult, but it's not rocket science. So you need really great stores where you have stores that are located in really the most correct locations. The stores have to be properly sized, which is to say not too big and not too small.
It's the Goldilocks of retailers.
Absolutely. The merchandise presentation has to be exciting and interesting and engaging. And it has to go hand in glove with what you're doing on the internet, so a customer sees you in a variety of ways that all speak to your brand. The interaction with customers has to be really outstanding, especially with regard to store interaction, because after all, retail is about an organization or an enterprise conveying a good or a service to someone on a human scale. There's a handoff to a human being, not a robot. And so your customer service in a store has to be par excellence, and your customer service as delivered through your web business has to do the same.
And to do that, are we going to see more and more of, I suppose, what I would call a mix of where sort of human rhythms meet algorithms, where you actually put those two forces together?
Well, I think there's always been the presence of data. It's now called big data. It's always been there.
So we've got people who actually use the small data they have, let alone the
Well, retailers famously ignored the
data
unless it confirmed the beliefs that they had.
Oh, yes.
So they conveniently edited.
As an ex-retailer, I've done store walks exactly like that.
So big data is not new, but the techniques and tools available to examine and analyze data in almost real time are becoming increasingly important. But I want to stress something. There's an element of wildness to the retail business that in our lifetime, AI is not going to overcome. The ability for customers to pivot, change direction at the drop of a hat, to fall in love with something that no one would have ever expected, or to fall out of love with something or with a brand in the same regard.
Again, if you look backwards, there were some real big retail beasts, who had phenomenal instincts, who could smell a good product when they saw it, who were amazing merchants. It feels like those big animals have disappeared into this world of algorithms and data and science. And
well, the traditional princes and princesses have fallen to earth, having placed one too many wild-ass bets that didn't pan out. They're lying in waiting, or their successors are lying in waiting or standing in the wings, ready to reassert themselves. But when they do, they'll be doing it with more of an intelligent view of what's possible, as opposed to just placing bets. I think the business has become too complicated, too treacherous, too risky for these kind of, I woke up this morning and decided that purple is the color.
Yeah.
So every store is going to carry a lot of that color.
You're in a very advantaged position. You have the ability to spend time thinking. You have the ability to look into the future with the very bright people that you have within your department and university. What do you see in your probably more accurate crystal ball than the rest of us have?
Well, I see that the world has shrunk to the size of a marble, literally. The only component that is insurmountable is the time to distance, and even that is shrinking. And so merchandise moves from southern China to the west coast of North America in 8 days, or in 24 hours via airplane. The fact of the matter is that merchandise is being manufactured on the other side of the world to suit a customer's decision, shipped and delivered literally within a few days, certainly within a week or so. So this speed to market has become increasingly evident. The fact is that the consumer space is worldwide. Middle class has emerged virtually everywhere in the world. Maybe Africa has yet to be has yet to insinuate itself on a large scale, but that's going to happen. And so this consumer class that responds to fashion and newness is just unbelievable in its potential. And the retailers that are going to be successful in this century are going to have to be able to spot those customers, read their reactions to trends, and act upon those reactions quickly.
And therefore, what skills do you think the successful retailers will need to have to be able to do that?
Well, as I said in my keynote, it's a left brain, right brain skill set. Most people don't possess both pronounced skills, but I think every successful organization will have to possess both pronounced skills. Organizations have to become extremely creative, while at the same time analytically determinable.
So do you see a time when there's almost like a pairing of a merchant and an analyst who work literally hand in glove with each other?
Well, the unrestrained merchant prince and princess are unreliable as leaders.
So I'm sure we both worked with in our past.
the unrestrained bean counter is deadly.
Yes.
And so it is a duopoly, if you will, and it has to be not just at the top, but throughout the organization. There has to be parallel groups that work together, respect and enjoy each other's skill sets, and to a customer deliver something that's exciting and successful at the same rate.
Now we're in the midst of either negotiations or a trade war, whichever side of the fence you're on, between China and the US. Who wins a trade war, especially this particular one?
If the trade war is between two superpowers, there are no winners. There's no question from an American vantage point, but possibly from a worldwide vantage point, that China has taken advantage of its trading partners in a whole variety of ways, not the least of which is refusal to protect international or intellectual property rights. But on the other hand, starting a fight publicly calls for an ability to save face, which is impossible, given that in a war there is a winner and a loser. And so the U.S. has tremendous need to win and no capacity to lose, and so do the Chinese. So I'm shocked that this has become what it is, which is a spat with tremendous misrepresentation of facts, principally on behalf of our president, who still seems to think that the Chinese government is paying the tariffs. I mean, somebody wake him up and get him to realize that it's the consumer that pays the price.
Presumably retailers can't absorb that 20-25% or? Well,
a Chinese manufacturer may or may not be able to absorb some of it. An intermediary partner who bears the tariff itself may be able to absorb some of it.
Except a lot more retailers are going direct now, so
exactly.
they don't have that cushion.
At the end of the day, like in the days of quota, I'm dating myself because I go way back, it's the consumer who pays the price. It's an added component of the cost of goods sold. And it's not going to be transparent at a tariff rate of 25%. So this is going to cause prices to inflate. This is going to cause demand to be muted. This could bring on a recession in the United States far sooner than we would normally see it. It's anybody's guess just how much tit-for-tat retaliation is going to take place. The Chinese yesterday announced a first round of retaliation. They have some extraordinary triggers or bullets in the gun that they hold, as does the United States. And so this is a very unsettled and inappropriate time that we're witnessing.
Now, one last question. Again, from your vantage point, both looking sort of backwards and looking forwards, how would you sum up the retail times that we're living in today?
Well, the good news is there's no shortage of customers.
Yeah.
Plenty of customers.
Yeah.
And in many parts of the world, they have plenty of disposable income, downturns notwithstanding. In the U.S., they're loading their disposable income wallet with credit card debt, once again, which is another crisis yet to be faced. But at the end of the day, consumers are out there, they have money to spend, and human beings are hard-coded everywhere in the world to be very responsive to fashion and newness, things that they really want that they don't really need. So I think up top the business is just fine. It's the inside of the business that's going through this terrible disruption.
Well, that's a sobering but thoughtful way of ending our conversation. Professor Marc Cohen from Columbia University, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
You're welcome.
Well, I'm now joined by James George, who is the International Managing Director for OC&C Consultancy. Absolute pleasure. You have, I suppose, the toughest gig of the day, opening up the conference with the advantages of that and the disadvantages in terms of the tech never quite works when the first presenter does it.
That's right. That's
so,
right.
you had all of our sympathy.
Yeah.
Maybe that was a good thing to do.
Yeah.
But the reason that you started was that you, together with the World Retail Congress, launched a report at today's Congress. So tell us a little bit about that, high velocity retail.
Yeah, high velocity retail, exactly. As you say, I started notwithstanding the technical glitches, but I think it was a great honour actually to be there and to be sort of, I suppose, bringing some of the sort of content that is framing the overall conference. So we're really delighted to be doing that. And we've spent, I suppose, probably sort of a couple of months really working on this report along with the team from WRC and from BrandZ and a number of the different businesses to really try and understand what's changing in the kind of retail world, which in a sense I think we've all got a pretty good idea on. But more importantly, how do retailers respond to that? And this concept of high velocity retail is all about what the kind of future successful kind of operating models are and how do we create those future sustainable models.
So if you had to distill the concept of high velocity retail, what would it be then?
So two things. We sort of deliberately, I think we deliberately called it velocity rather than speed, but sort of two things. Firstly, velocity is about speed and direction. So I think this concept, which is, of course, the world is getting faster and faster, and with that, retailers need to accelerate a lot of the things that they're doing. But at the same time, if you haven't set a kind of meaningful direction, if you're not really clear about how your proposition is going to resonate with the customers or beat the competitors, then speed is not going to solve any of those problems.
That's a very important point, because you could just end up being unbelievably busy fools.
Exactly. And I think a lot of retailers have got into this kind of mindset, which is we need to go faster and faster and faster and faster, and aren't actually pausing to reflect on the fact that actually there are people out there who've just got a better proposition, and so you need to make sure that you've got real clarity on that before you then start accelerating away in that direction. So I think it's sort of getting that balance right between the speed and the direction is really important.
So, speed, direction.
Yeah.
And then what?
Well, speed and direction. So I think on the sort of 2 points of speed and direction, I mean, we talked a lot about different, I suppose, sort of tactics or approaches to speeding up the business model. I think on the direction side, one of the sort of interesting conversations was really about the need as retailers to be able to say there's, on some aspects, we are the best. We have to be best at something. And that could be on pricing or on quality or on service or on speed and ease, but we have to have some strong suits that we have. I think one of the things that we were talking about this morning was, this concept of, almost infinite choice. There are 800,000 retailers out there. So for a consumer to choose you have to have something that is a real strong suit, that is a differentiated suit. So that is sort of the first bit, which is, be best at something that matters. And then the second bit was, which I think goes alongside that, and I suppose is is the sort of theory of strategy. Really, is be choiceful, and sort of be choiceful on where you follow as well as where you lead. So the example I gave previously was Shein, which is a sort of very high growth fashion retailer, where they're actually delivering product in 2 weeks, at 2 weeks sort of lead time. So unlike all of the talk about it's next day or same day or next hour, actually they're being really thoughtful about how they make that model work for them. So there's a bit about speed, and there's a lot about how do I think about the kind of direction.
Now, you talked a little bit about it in the report. There's a reasonable amount in terms of differentiation and the role of the brand within all that. How important do you view the role of the brand in that differentiation process going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, I suppose there's a couple of things there. One is, retailers who are kind of increasingly focused on branded products and distinctive and differentiated product. And I think there's definitely some good examples. We used Lululemon as a good example of businesses that have got really distinctive and differentiated kind of product. And I think actually that looks to be quite a winning strategy in this world. But at the same time, thinking about the retail brand, so the brand under which the kind of retailer sits. And I think that is important because it is about what's front of mind. It's about how do consumers, when they go online, not necessarily start with Google, but may start with that as a kind of an entry point into the business. And it's also the way in which we're building trust, and retailers are building trust with the consumers. So finding a way to make sure that that brand is known, really resonates for something that is important to the customer is a real key part of managing that, managing in that world of infinite choice as well.
I suppose the big question is so what? So what do we as retailers need to do? Change our horizons, our mindsets, or the way in which we organise our businesses? Well,
I think, as I say, there's a couple of so whats, and I've talked a little bit about sort of direction. I mean, one of the things that we've tried to do, we analysed nearly 1,000 retailers, and to sort of see, are there some emerging models that are proving to be more successful than others? And we identified 4 models. So we identified a model which is all around platforms, typified by Amazon and Alibaba and ASOS and Farfetch and people like that. We identified a model which was effectively the value champions, where you see people like Aldi and Lidl and Costco and Primark. Customer solutions, which are really sort of businesses where service, content, the conversation, and the kind of wraparound that you provide people with starts to differentiate them. So the example we used was Selfridges, but you see these businesses in health and beauty, as you think I use the example of sporting goods, areas where there's a real kind of conversation going on with the consumer. And then a bucket of the brands, where the retailers are actually transforming more into branded businesses than they are into retailers. And those 4 models we can see are really demonstrating very strong growth, good levels of profitability. We've described those as the winning model, or I should say winning models. And one of the big messages here is if you're not a winning model, then you're a losing model. And the kind of concept...
Is it that binary now?
In simplification of stories, life is never, life is never that binary. But I do think, part of the challenge that retailers have is they see a load of these challenges. They see this real need for transformation, and 75% of retail CEOs told us that they don't think their model is sustainable in the future. So I think having some simplified versions of models to be aiming for is really helpful for retailers to think about, okay, am I headed in this direction or this direction? So I think it does add simplicity. I think the sort of biggest challenge is that faced with that need to transform, that retailers can't really plot a path forward. They can't sort of put a vision together and work towards it. And I think that's the biggest challenge actually that retail needs to overcome. So hopefully we've given a bit of clarity in terms of where that higher ground lies for retailers to be striving for.
And I suppose to encapsulate all of that, it's evident in the title, but one has to now do all of that at breakneck speed. So what strain does that put on the organisation structure of retailers today in order to be able to deliver that?
It's a great question. So I think, you're right. What we're talking about is operating in a high velocity way in a high velocity world. But I think it's fair to say you don't have to get there immediately, and I think it's an important point. It's an important sort of point in differentiation. I think when we were talking earlier on the stage with Naga about sort of examples, we talked about Next. Next is a great example of a business that has been on this journey for 10 or 15 years. It's not suddenly overnight made a sort of transformation in the business. It's been very thoughtful, very methodical, kept one eye on the sort of core business and driving that forward very effectively, whilst being very smart about the sort of transformation.
Well, it's a bit like flying a jumbo jet and changing the engine, at 40,000 feet.
Exactly.
It takes skill.
Exactly, and I think part of the reason why retailers sort of struggle with this so much is that they sort of see the nature of the challenge, the change that needs to be made, and that is it's just too difficult. It's too substantial to really comprehend, because they're thinking about making that change over a year or two, and they know the investment and the risk and the likely response from the shareholders is going to be very significant if they say, well, we're going to make no profits for 2 years. I think it's quite different if you say, actually, here's where we want to be in 10 years' time, and then be thoughtful about the journey we need to go on to manage that transformation. So although, as I say, everyone is striving to speed up, and we are trying to get retailers to sort of work in a high velocity way, that doesn't mean you need to sort of accelerate from 0 to 60 in 3 seconds. You can potentially take your time over it.
Well, the report is published. We'll put a URL where you can download it. It also includes a lot of BrandZ data and the analysis you've done on that together with our BrandZ team. So I declare an interest in terms of saying it's very good.
Perfect.
But it's certainly worth reading, and I think puts a mark in the ground, I think, just in terms of where retailing is heading over the course of the next few years. So thank you very much indeed. It's been a pleasure.
Good. Well, thank you. We hope it starts a conversation. I don't think it finishes a conversation, but at least we hope it starts a conversation. So thank you very much.
Well, at the start of the World Retail Congress here in Amsterdam, we launched in conjunction with the World Retail Congress the BrandZ Top 75 Most Valuable Global Retail Brands. And you can get a copy of that report, which also includes some key insights that I know you'll find very valuable. All you need to do to get hold of that report is just download it from www.brandz.com. Well, if you can't wait to find out who's on that list, all you need to do though is just watch this to see the BrandZ Top 75 Most Valuable Global Retail Brands for 2019.
Down softly, just say you're gonna leave. Oh,
Well, I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by a fellow colleague from WPP, Karen Blackett, who's the country manager for the UK. Karen, thank you very much indeed.
My absolute pleasure. Just got off the plane.
Yeah, it's really nice to see you here in Amsterdam. You're leading one of the sessions this afternoon on media. I want to ask you a few questions that are specific to that panel, first of all, and then we'll just sort of broaden the debate out. I think the topic of the panel is is mass media dead?
Yes.
Is it?
No. I do think we are fixated in our industry because it makes very good headlines to sort of play off one thing against the other. So it's now all about digital and it's not about broadcast. It's now all about millennials and it's not about boomers. I think we have a habit in our industry of playing off one thing against the other, and absolutely not. Mass media is not dead. Personalisation is brilliant. It allows you to do things which is more engaging. It allows you to fine-tune. It allows you to help convert. But you can't do that without having built a brand first using mass media. So it's not either or. We operate in complex communication systems and you need both.
So what's the balance then between the two? How do you work out?
Well, it's all about your sources of growth. So I think that's the first thing, and what I'll be saying on the panel as well is that we're in the business of growth. Our clients are trying to grow, and it's about trying to work out where your sources of growth are. So if you have still got headroom in an audience which is buying from you, but there's headroom to get them to convert and buy more, that would allow you to think about more personalisation to tip them over to make sure that they then purchase. And it's about understanding their purchase intent, about understanding the different shopper journeys. But if it's about trying to make sure that we're bringing more people in, that allows you a different form of communication system and method, which is more about brand awareness and brand building. So it's about understanding where your sources of growth are and really interrogating your data to really understand who your existing customers are, but then not just talking to them because you want to bring more people in.
So it's becoming sort of much more complicated than
it is. It is. And look, it sounds a bit like an oxymoron, but the more data we have, the more humans you need as well, because data is brilliant and it allows us to look and find those signals which talk to us about purchase intent and where potential could be, but you still need that human intervention in order to really make sure that we're interpreting all those data signals. And it's not about the aggregate, it's not about the individual, it's about the aggregate of the data signals, and it's about taking advantage of those. But it is complicated and it is a complex communication system.
But is there a slight dichotomy within that? Because what we're seeing across the world, I think, is a big growth in programmatic buying.
Look, I think the stat was about 85% of digital displays currently being brought programmatically, and I think it's brilliant. It allows you to do things at scale, it allows you to be efficient, but I always say that you want to make sure that you don't become culturally invisible. You want to ensure that, you know, a brand only exists in the head of another person, and you want to ensure that you're not optimising yourself into a suboptimal position. So that's really important. It is complicated. It's not easy. And when you think about not just paid media, but you think about owned and earned as well, and how we integrate the data signals that we get from those different areas, it is complicated, but we have got brilliant tech and tools which allows us to start stitching things together.
Now, as well as being the country manager for WPP in the UK, you also run one of the biggest media agencies.
I'm chairwoman. Josh runs it. Josh is the CEO.
I'm sure you're there. I'm
it.
sure you're there with a good guiding hand. You've been in the media industry for some
Since
time.
God was a boy.
Yes, well, I didn't want to go quite as far as but as you've said it. What changes have you seen, and given where we are in the media world now, are we in a good place or a bad place?
Look, I think the big debate, as well as the personalisation debate and what we can now do with all of the data signals that we now have, the big debate is about transparency and is about trust. And I think there has been, you know, if you think about the Advertising Association and their lead conference that they had, and Keith Weed talking about, look, as an industry, we need to make sure that we build trust again. There was a brilliant book written years ago called The Trusted Advisor,
yes,
which talks about the equation of trust. And we need to make sure that we are credible. We need to make sure we're reliable. We need to make sure we're building empathy. And that self-orientation divided by self-orientation, it's less about us and more about our customers and our clients. So I think that's the big thing about making sure that as an industry we're trusted. And part of that's about transparency as well. So part of that's about ensuring that we talk to our clients about how we make money and making sure that we advise our clients when it comes to brand safety. So I think those are the big conversations that we're having now in our industry, as well as the conversations about how much more we can do with all the data that's available to us. I mean, we know more now than we ever did about how advertising works and how we can build brands and how we can ensure that we get short-term and long-term ROI. We know more now than we ever did with all of the various, you know, media mix models that we do within WPP and the tools that we have at our disposal. But it's being responsible with that as well, I think, is absolutely key.
Now, I can't let you go without asking just a couple of questions on WPP as I've got you here. What's WPP doing at the moment with the various different companies that it has in the UK to make it more relevant to clients' needs?
Look, I think one of the things that I have done with the help of my UK CEOs is form a client council, and the purpose of our client council is to look at what growth looks like in the next 5 years for them, to find out what their needs are, and it is our responsibility to help them grow. So to make sure that we have the right services and the right departments and the right talent to help deliver that growth. So the Client Council allows us to talk to our clients in an intimate basis, small circles of 6 to 8 clients at a time, to talk about growth in the next 5 years and to start working out what's missing and what we can do and what the challenges are. Part of the conversation is about having the right talent, and that's about the diversity as talent as well as the actual specialism of that talent. And part of what we've done as well, you know, Marc Reed appointed Stefan in the Chief Technical Officer role, making sure that as WPP we now are looking at a WPP tech platform, making sure that that platform is modular, that it is not just our data but looking at our clients' first-party data, because that single view of our clients' customers is absolutely the holy grail, and that will help them with their personalisation.
Well, finally, Karen, how would you describe, in just a few words, the times we're living in? When you walk out of your front door in the morning and get to the office, what do you feel? Is it?
Oh, I would say I would describe optimistic, challenging, dynamic, and exciting. I think we're in exciting times.
That's quite a nice way of leaving the house in the morning. A nice friend of mine to get into the office.
Definitely.
Well, Karen Blackett, Country Manager for WPP in the UK and Chairman as well of MediaCom. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I'm very looking forward to your session a bit later on. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, it's very nice to see you again, Ian. It's day 2 here at the World Retail Congress in Amsterdam. How have you felt day 2 has gone?
I think we've had a great day today. It's been really busy. The numbers actually are looking great in terms of attendance, but obviously more importantly it's the presentations we've had today. We started the morning with a great economic overview from Martin Wolf, the Chief Economic Correspondent and Deputy Editor of the Financial Times, who gave it's 10 years since he last presented at the Congress, and he was great then, and he was really great today in terms of his analysis of the world. But really, I think the message that I took away was, obviously there's worrying things on the horizon around what's happening around the trade wars, but the rise of Asia, China obviously, but also India was his message. I mean, the growth in the global economy will come from Asia was his key takeaway. But then we moved on to two great retail sessions. We had the chief executive of Sephora, which until tomorrow night is our current retailer of the year. They were one retailer of the year last year, and this was really his opportunity, Chris de la Puente, the CEO, to talk about why Sephora, which is a 50-year-old brand, and now is probably more relevant to a whole new generation of consumers than ever before. It's a digital leader. Has great policies, proven policies around that it implements around diversity within its workforce, and it really nurtures startups. And he talked a lot about that. And I think it's a case study, a role model almost. I think that people really appreciate. We've had great feedback from that session. And then Marc Rosen, who's head of direct to consumer for Levi's on the main stage. So typically polished performance, as you would imagine from a brand like Levi's, and Marc was a great presenter, but there was something really important there where he talked about, it's a 165-year-old brand, and I guess like Sephora in its way, it is constantly innovating, and he talked a lot about innovation and the move to use creativity and new developments to really help the whole process. And he talked a lot about customization, personalization, and really what was born out of looking at how they can make themselves, the production process, more sustainable. They developed new methods where they're using laser technology can make a pair of customized jeans in 90 seconds, which is extraordinary. So they're now moving to being able to make what they sell rather than sell what they make, which I think is a really important shift in the whole approach. And then a really important final session that we had was looking really at diversity, and we had a great session, which was, the message there that I heard really strongly was that before growth in a business comes from relentless sales growth, obviously, but the message was that diversity leads to growth because it brings in new talent, and it reflects the customer base of every retailer today anywhere in the world. And it was a really powerful session and very practical session that, again, we've had great feedback from. But we've just finished the student competition as well, where sort of 18 to 21-year-olds presenting their visions of the future based on a brief that we gave them to pick an icon from the 1960s and to bring to life the values of that icon into today's world to create a new brand for Millennials or Gen Z consumers, whichever they wanted to, using the channels and the techniques available today. And it was inspirational, as always. And the judges said, because some of the judges have done all 10 years, that it was the strongest lineup ever. So we will reveal the results tomorrow night at the awards. So it's been a great packed day.
Well, Ian, thank you very much indeed. I hope you have a really good evening tonight, and we very much look forward to talking to you tomorrow, which amazingly will be the final day of the World Retail Congress for 2019. Ian McGarrigle, Chairman of the World Retail Congress, thanks very much indeed.
Thanks very much. Good to be here. See you tomorrow.